All right, so we're going to talk about ozone, which is not on the list, but it is a big player. Is created when interacting with the NOx and SOx. So ozone is three oxygen molecules, O3, and ozone is good when it is at the top of the troposphere or the bottom of the stratosphere in the ozone layer. That's a great place for it. However, when it's close to Earth, when it's interacting with living things, that's not a good thing. It's harmful. It's harmful to, once again, your respiratory function and to tissue, to plant tissue. It is formed, like I said, when nitrogen oxides or NOx interacts with oxygen, it creates this ozone. So when you have lots of cars in an area that's producing NOx and SOx, you're going to start to create that ozone, and that's going to be close to Earth, and that's not good. And this is a big player in smog, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this smoke fog. But it is when ozone interacts with NOx and SOx, particulate matter, something called photochemical oxidants, it creates smog. So ozone is a big player in smog. And what are these photochemical oxidants? Photochemical oxidants are chemicals that form as a result of sunlight interacting with the NOx and the SOx and the particulate matter. It is going to change the character of the pollutant, and so these are your photochemical, photo meaning light, and so photochemical oxidants and ozones are some of the key players in smog. Smog is like a big stew of pollutants, and they interact, and it takes the sunlight that interacts and it changes it, and it becomes just this sort of cesspool of pollutants that you don't want to breathe in. Volatile organic compounds. We are back to the list, VOCs as we call them. Our organic compounds, these are your nonpolar molecules. Because they're not attracted to one another, they're going to evaporate quickly. And so your gasoline, your lighter fluid, your oil-based paints, perfume, nail polish remover, all those things that sort of smell, it'll fill up a room because it evaporates really quickly. They can be naturally occurring, so the pine tree smell is actually a volatile organic compound. But there's a lot of anthropogenic VOCs. It is also a big player in the photochemical smog. So here we are once again talking about smog, and we'll talk more about smog later. But the VOCs, when interacting with light is going to change the characteristics of the VOCs and sort of include it in that big pool of pollutants that we call smog. Mercury. We're taking a step away from smog for a moment, and we're thinking now more about mercury, or a heavy metal. It's found in coal and oil and is toxic to the nervous system. So once again, it's like lead in that it's an ion, so it's a metal and it's an ion, and when it gets into your system, it's going to take the place of all of the metals that are supposed to be there, your active metals, and it's going to attach to things because it's got that charge. It's sort of like a little magnet, and it's going to mess up the way that your pumps work, and the way, your cellular pumps, the way that your cells are interacting with one another, and so mercury does not help your system. And one of the largest contributors to mercury being released into the atmosphere are coal plants. When we burn coal, there's mercury in coal, and so when we burn it, it's released in the atmosphere. We also have waste incinerators, which burn garbage. So when there's mercury in the garbage, the law of conservation of matter states that waste or that materials cannot be created or destroyed. So just because you're burning garbage doesn't mean it disappears. That material goes up into the atmosphere. Remember, in environmental issues, we're always just moving the problem from one place to another. So waste incinerators are taking all of that garbage and putting it into the atmosphere as particulate matter, and then we get to breathe it in. So that is mercury, and when that mercury is in the atmosphere, the rain will uh, grab onto it. It is attracted to the rain or to the precipitation, and it's going to fall to the earth. And then uh, groundwater flow. It's going to flow into our lakes and rivers, and it's going to get into our food chain. And that's where we eat the mercury, is when it gets into our food chain. And that's where it has negative impacts on us. So we want to keep mercury out of the atmosphere. Finally, our last slide. Let's think about the difference between primary and secondary pollutants, because we've talked about both of these in this lecture. Primary pollutants are compounds that come directly out of a smokestack, an exhaust pipe, or a natural source. So these are, when we're burning manure, and at a cold temperature we produced nitrogen monoxide. Carbon monoxide. Then if we produce carbon dioxide by burning something at a high temperature, then those are our primary pollutants. It's the first step of a pollutant. And then when we were talking about those photochemical oxides, ozone, those things that occurred after they interacted with water, with each other, with sunlight, these are our secondary pollutants. And so smog is a big pool of secondary pollutants. In fact, some of the pollutants in there are not very well understood because there's so many variables interacting and creating chemicals that we don't necessarily understand. But in order to control secondary pollutants, you must first control primary pollutants. So here we need to start controlling the nitrogen oxides if we're going to be able to control the ozone, because it's the nitrogen oxides that create the ozone. And we need to be able to control the VOCs, stop the VOCs from getting into the atmosphere, so that when the sunlight interacts with it, it doesn't become more toxic. And so that is the pollutants. There's a lot of different pollutants, and there's different ways of organizing them. The take-home message that I want you to have is the difference between primary pollutants, which are primary pollutants, or which pollutants are primary, and what are secondary pollutants, and which ones are secondary, and starting to understand of smog. As we talk about it more, you'll gain a greater understanding of it, but also to just have these sort of organized, because it can get a little confusing. But that's it. I hope you have a great day.